Good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to week 4 of our seminar. I'm Bridget Barron. I'm a faculty member helping to co-lead this initiative on technology, equity, and learning opportunities. We are really excited this week to be talking about one of the issues that has come up each of the first 3 weeks, and that is how to think about learning to use technology and the internet to advance one's own goals, one's own learning. How do we measure that? What are we trying to track in terms of research, in terms of what can we say about whether or not we are making progress? And each week we've had a different kind of organization. Tonight we have 2 wonderful speakers that are going to share their work. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is an initiative that the Stanford Graduate School of Education created to advance equity by creating and investigating ways that technology can increase learning opportunities for pre-K through 12 learners, families, and educators. We are trying to foster cross-sector conversation and collaboration. I just got to finish watching the video from last week, which was pretty amazing. Both Janet and I, Janet Carlson, my co-leader, were in Washington, D.C. at the American Educational Research Association conference, and so we couldn't be here. But because we had things videotaped, we were able to listen in. And I thought one of the most interesting questions that came up at the very end was about cross-sector collaboration. Who's supposed to be solving these very, very big challenges that we have with respect to equity, technology, and learning opportunities? And are the different sectors actually talking to one another? So are industries talking with educators and researchers? Because it doesn't necessarily feel like that is happening. And so what we're trying to do in this space is use the opportunity and the privilege we have of being a university to bring people together to have these conversations. And we do realize that people are working in silos. And Richard Kulata made the interesting point that even within a sector like education, people are not talking to one another. So district leaders, superintendents, they might be geographically right next to each other, but they're not necessarily having conversations about how they're innovating, what the challenges are, how they're dealing with companies that may be very excited to have their product in their schools. And then researchers, we in the academy, we believe that our work is designed to make a difference, that it's practical, but we don't often get to share our work in ways that maybe educators get to hear, or actually industry. We in the academy are encouraged to publish in journals that not very many people read, actually. It's sort of an interesting situation. So we're really excited to have people in the room, and we want to just do a quick show of hands just to see who's in the room tonight. So if you are an educator in schools, raise your hand. Great. So you are the most important people in the room. What about out-of-school educator? Museums or nonprofit? Community centers, librarians, a couple. Great. How many researchers do we have in the room? Few researchers, great. What about, do we have anybody from industry, from a technology company? Wonderful. Well, welcome. I'm not sure if I'm leaving anybody out. Policy? Not too many policy people. District leaders? People who are in charge of organizing? So we have one. Okay, great. Good. Well, welcome, everybody. We are going to have some time for conversation tonight for sure. I want to turn attention to our 2 speakers, so I'm going to introduce each of them, and then I'm going to hand over the floor to them because they've prepared 2 presentations. They actually have never met, and their presentations are so complementary and lovely together. One is going to focus on research and data and how do we actually try to measure skill using the internet, and what does that look like in terms of demographics and other variables. And then we have another presentation that's going to focus on how do we advance everybody and what kinds of resources and tools are out there. And actually, we're going to learn about some tonight. So Eszter Hargittai is going to be our first speaker. She is the Delaney Family Professor in the Communication Studies Department and and the faculty associate of the Institute for Policy Research at Northwestern University, where she heads the Web Use Project. Her research looks at how people might benefit from their digital media use, with a particular focus on how differences in people's web skills influences what they do online. And she's looked at these questions in the domains of information seeking, health, political participation, job searching, the sharing of creative content, and privacy management. These are all issues that are near and dear to everyone's heart. Here at Stanford, we just had a security breach, and so we are very aware that even if you have a lot of expertise around, you're not necessarily secure with your data. Her work has received awards from several professional associations, and she's received awards for her teaching and mentoring and her engagement with the public. She's published over 70 academic papers and several op-eds. So Eszter is one of those people that really is trying to bridge research and the public conversation that's happening. She's given invited talks in 15 countries on 4 continents. And I could go on and on. Her work has been funded by many foundations. And Eszter is on her way to take on a new professorship in Zurich, and we are all looking forward to visiting her there. Our second speaker, Anmei Chung, is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Mozilla Foundation. She leads the Foundation's web literacy efforts. One of the world's largest social enterprises, Mozilla promotes openness, innovation, and opportunity online and creates open standards that enable access and opportunity for all. Before joining this organization, Anmei was the Associate Director of Education for the U.S. programs of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, where she supported initiatives to improve student learning through the use of digital media. Prior to this, she led the education grant-making at the C.S. Mott Foundation and partnered with the U.S. Department of Education to build the after-school field by supporting training and technical assistance, research and evaluation, policy development, and public awareness and outreach. And she knows Richard well and Karen Cater, and so I think you're going to be a great bridge for the conversation that started happening last week. The partnerships that she has helped lead have won awards. The last partnership won the Public Excellence Award and was a semifinalist for the Kennedy School of Government Innovations in American Government Award. She's been an Associate Director at the National Institute of Out-of-School Time at the Center for Research on Women at Wellesley, and she directed the Save the Children Out-of-School Time Rural Initiative. So please join me in welcoming our 2 speakers, and I'm going to turn it over to Eszter, and we're going to learn a lot about the measurement of skill.
That's not my slide.
This is yours, right?
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Bridget. So I really like the format of this program, so I'm excited to take part. Thanks for having me. So I will be talking about, well, are they digital natives or digital naives? So there's a lot of enthusiasm about how the web can give people from different backgrounds a voice. People get really excited about this. There are lots of services that can potentially do this. But is it actually meeting this promise? So that's what I'm interested in. More generally, my work looks at, as Bridget mentioned in my bio, basically who benefits from their digital media uses. So I'm a sociologist by training. I'm interested in questions of social inequality. And so as the internet came on the scene, I was curious, is it going to help people or is it going to hold people back? So basically, from a sociological perspective, there are these 2 competing theories. One idea is social mobility, which is where people could actually improve their life chances and improve their position in society over time. And then the other is social reproduction, where actually not much changes and they kind of stay where they are. And with respect to the internet, what I have been interested in for the last 2 decades is seeing, well, does the internet play a role in this process, right? So does it actually help people improve their life chances, or does it not do much, or might it actually harm some people in some cases? So one of the things I want to do today is address some assumptions about what is often referred to as the net generation. So here are some characteristics that you often hear that are pretty much assumed in discussions and conversations, and they have to do with the experiences of today's youth with technologies. But really, how much of this is actually true, right? So there's a lot of assumption about these statements being true, but are they? And so the data I'm going to share today and findings will show that some of these assumptions are in fact true. So most of youth have in fact grown up with technologies and spend quite a bit of time with them. But it's not necessarily the case that they do many things regularly, nor that they're universally savvy. And so I'll be sharing data on that point. So there are two myths that I want to bust today. One is that all young people are digitally savvy just because they grew up with technologies, and that's not true, but you don't have to take my word for it. I'll give you data. And then the other is, which is related, but actually a different point, which is that young people are automatically savvier than older people, again, because younger people grew up with it, whereas older people, often referred to as digital immigrants, are, didn't get to grow up with it. And so think of me as your digital myth buster. I have a bonus for you today. I will also address big data a little bit. So big data, it's a very hot topic. But I ask, is bigger always better? So this will be just a little point that I'll be addressing with the data that I share otherwise, kind of a takeaway for those of you who do work with big data, but not even just those of you who work with big data, but those of you, which would probably be all of you, who hear about reports that report on big data. And I will give you some tools to think about such reports more critically than is often the case. OK, so I thought I should take a few minutes just to share what I mean by skills, right? They could mean so many different things. And so I just want to clarify that in my mind, it's a very broad concept that encompasses a lot of different abilities. Anything from awareness and understanding of knowing what's possible to do with technologies, right? So if you're not even aware that something is possible, then it's unlikely that you will engage with it. And then there's the idea of efficient information seeking, and then assessing the credibility of the content you find. And I've done quite a bit of work on that. It's not what I'll be talking about today, but I'm happy to discuss it later. Then there's the question of participation, which I define as active engagement online, joining communities, and contributing to content online. And that will be a big focus of the talk today. And then there are issues of privacy and security. I won't really talk about that today, but happy to chat about that later as well. A bigger and bigger issue, basically. So when 15 years ago I started focusing on skill, it actually wasn't that big of an issue, but it's obviously become an increasingly important issue where skill matters a lot. So these are the areas that I will focus on today, but I've done work on all of them. So what do you do if you are interested in studying skill? Where do you get data on skill? Well, there aren't really readily available data sets out there, so you basically have to go and collect your own data. So what I've done over the years is I've done a lot of work that relies on in-person observations and interviews, so very in-depth qualitative work, where I would gather data about people's skills pretty much one-on-one, which, again, is very helpful because it gives you a lot of in-depth information, but it has limits in the sense of generalizability and scaling up, right? You can't scale up that kind of a study to 1,000, 10,000 people. That's just not feasible. So what I have done in my work is I work with surveys often, but what I did was I developed survey instruments to study skill based on the observational work that I had done prior, right? So I would do the observational work. I would at the same time collect survey data and then see which survey measures correlated well with the measures from people's actual skills. I mention this because I think when I show you the skill measures, you might be skeptical, like how can you really get it to be so simple? But I've worked very hard on this for a long I have 3 separate papers just about the methods. So happy to talk about that in more detail. But just to let you know, it's not like one day I woke up and I thought, oh, this survey question will do this well. That said, surveys always have limitations, just like every method. So one of the things I do when I do run surveys is include an attention verification question. And some survey researchers do this, but many don't. And for anyone in the audience who does use surveys or thinks about using surveys or will be using surveys, I highly recommend this kind of a question. It really helps with data quality. Basically, as you can tell, what it does is, so anyone who's actually paying attention to your survey, this is completely trivial to answer correctly. But anyone who's just checking things off randomly has only a 20% chance of getting this right. So they'll probably get it wrong, which signals to you that you should probably pitch their answer, which in some cases, I think people hesitate to use this question because they feel like, oh, I'll have fewer respondents, I'll have, a lower response rate. But you know what? This is just junk getting into your data set anyway, so you might as well get rid of it. I actually use 2 such questions on each of my instruments, and you have to get both right to stay in the study. So that's how I try to make sure that the data I'm collecting is quality data, at least in terms of attention. OK, so what I've done, in large part due to research constraints, is study young adults in the Chicago area quite a bit, but I'll also be sharing data with you on nationally representative surveys, samples. So in terms of awareness and understanding, here's a question. So this is like a key question in my work, which measures skill. And again, this is the measure that I've developed in lengthy studies paired with in-person observations, in-depth interviews, in-depth data. And so basically, I ask people for their level of understanding of different internet-related terms. And one of the things that you'll probably be thinking when I show you these terms is, well, these are kind of outdated. Are they really relevant? They don't include more recent items, and I'll address that in a little bit. But so here are some basic internet-related terms and how a group of young adults, so again, members of the net generation, digital natives, report their level of understanding of these terms. And you can see that some of them they understand uniformly pretty well, but others they understand at different rates. So one of the things you might be thinking, well, there's this thing BCC on here. Like, who cares if an 18-year-old knows what, that stands for blind carbon copy? And no, we don't actually care. Like, they don't need to know that, but they do need to know the functionality. I'm sure we could all think of pretty embarrassing situations that have arisen because people have not used CC and BCC in the correct ways. So it is something that you'd want a workforce to be familiar with. So in addition to measuring understanding through this instrument, in some cases, I will also run multiple choice questions, which is, a really concrete way of getting at whether someone knows something. So in this case, I'll give you a minute, read the options. What does BCC, what does BCC mean? And for those of you who knows what it means, this is not a trick question. I'm quite sure you can figure out what the right answer is. So it's worth noting that a third of this young adult sample, the savvy net generation, could not get this answer right. So I think that's an important reality check of who's coming into work organizations when it comes to their digital savvy or lack thereof. So here's another example. These are other terms and people's level of understanding. And here again, we have the term phishing with a PH. And you're thinking, well, does it really matter if someone actually knows the word phishing? It's more about the concept of your identity being stolen through deceitful ways. OK, so another multiple choice question I ask is basically another multiple choice question where I ask respondents to identify which of these is most likely to be the web address of a bank. And again, if you know how to read web addresses, this is not really a trick question. I don't think it should be too hard for you to figure out which is the correct answer. But interestingly, among, again, young adults, the digitally supposedly savvy, only 12% could get this right. Now, that's a problem because we do have people stealing identities. And yes, in some cases, like with Stanford, it happened at an institutional level. But in other cases, it happens at that individual level where people are, in fact, walking into tricky situations. So again, I think a helpful reminder that just because they grew up with it doesn't mean that they know every aspect of the internet and technologies. So what I'm interested in is identifying patterns, seeing whether there are patterns in terms of who is savvy, who isn't, who understands the internet, who has awareness, what do people do, and who does different things online. So today I'll be focusing on two variables with relationship to skill and participation. One is gender, and the other is socioeconomic status. So when it comes to skill and gender, what we find when it comes to level of understanding of internet terms is that men report higher levels. And we see that over time, this difference remains. So one of the, I mentioned that, so one of the points that people raise is, well, don't over time people improve their skills? They learn about the internet more, so they get better. And yes, you can see that from this graph, people's skills have indeed gone up. But this is those same terms over time. So the uniqueness of this study, which I realize is a few years old, but what's special about it is that I have data about the same people over time, and that's very rare in this field, that you're gathering data about the same people. So you can really observe differences, again, within the same person. And so what's interesting here is, sure, people may have improved their skills with respect to those terms that are pretty traditional, like basic internet understanding terms, but the difference is, but the internet changes all the time, and new terms and functionalities come up, and new services, and it's very likely that people would differ, again, with those new ones as well. And I don't show that those data today, but we have data from the later years where we've developed a privacy-specific skill measure, and again, there are definitely differences there by different factors. What I do want to emphasize here with respect to gender is that it's not shockingly a very complicated variable when it comes to skills and internet uses. A few points from other work I've done. So women tend to think that they have lower skills even when they don't necessarily have lower skills than men. What we don't know, what's really hard to tell from the literature, is if it's men overestimating their skills or women underestimating their skills. But there is definitely a gender discrepancy, which is important to note. And then the other thing that's important to note, which is from another paper, is that even thinking that your skills are lower actually does influence what you end up doing. And I'll talk about this more a little bit later. But so even if it's just in your head, it actually, turns out, does have repercussions for what you do. So we can't just dismiss it that, oh, women just think they're lower skilled. It actually does potentially matter. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with XKCD. Very insightful comic. So I think this sums up the issue a lot with the gender issue. So instead of like getting deeply academic more here about this, I think this is actually quite insightful about the issue. And again, we can talk about this more later. So moving on to socioeconomic status questions. So what we find is that these young adults who come from less privileged backgrounds have lower level skills than those who come from more privileged backgrounds. So there is a relationship between socioeconomic status and skill. And again, you might ask, well, how does this change over time? Like, are people improving their skills? And the graph I'm about to show you scientifically is really beautiful, but otherwise it's kind of sad. Because basically what it shows is that over time, yes, again, everyone's skills have gone up with respect to those basic terms. But in terms of the relationship of skill to socioeconomic status, that's pretty much stayed the same. So those who are the least privileged are still the least skilled. So these are, average measures from the data set. OK, so this is what we find for a group of young adults who are very diverse in terms of socioeconomic status and also race and ethnicity, which is a variable I haven't talked about but have also analyzed. What would we find if we have national data? So, we find differences locally. Do we find differences nationally? In 2009, and I'll get back to that in a moment, the Federal Communications Commission collected some nationally representative data about internet uses where they actually replicated a short version of my skill measure, which was great. And analyzing those data, what we find is that both income and education are positively related to skills. So now, going out to the representative sample of Americans, where we have people of different ages and different incomes and different education levels, what we find is those who are more privileged, so again, socioeconomic status is positively related to skills. So those who are more privileged understand and know more about the internet. However, and this is where we bust the second myth, when analyzing the data for people 50 and under, there's no relationship between age and skill. So yes, over 50, there is in fact a decline in skill by age. but 50 and under, there isn't. And again, this was like 7 years ago, so now it would be like this would be the 55-year-olds and over and under, where there's not necessarily a relationship between skill and age. So I think this is important to remember, partly in the educational setting, because I think partly there tends to be anxiety, like, how can we teach the kids when they already know more than the teachers? But no, they don't necessarily know more than the teachers. And I think that's really important for teachers to recognize. I think that should be empowering for them. Side note, as I mentioned, these data were collected in 2009, and you might be wondering, like, why is she relying on such old data? Well, one reason is that no federal agency since 2009 has collected data about internet uses that go beyond basic access statistics. And I think that's really bad. And I wrote an op-ed about this a few weeks ago that you can access here. And I don't know how many of you were following this, but a few weeks ago, the Federal Communications Commission voted on broadband subsidy for low-income households, which is, of course, great. It passed. It's going to cost about $2 billion a year. It is a necessary condition to get more people online and active, to make affordable broadband available to them in their home, but argue that it's not a sufficient condition because there are reasons other than the cost of internet connection that people don't go online. And one of the things that Ashley Walker and I, analyzing that data set, have found is that people's privacy concerns, regardless of income and education, are very much related to whether they're adopting the internet or not. So we're spending all this money making internet cheaper, but that doesn't mean that everyone's now going to hop online, because money may not be the only impediment. So part of my argument in that op-ed is that we need to be thinking about the other factors that might matter as an impediment right now to internet adoption. But the other point I make is that we also need to be spending some money, like a tiny fraction of those $2 billion. If we just took a tiny fraction of that money, we could gather really good data over time to have a better understanding of how Americans are using the internet in their everyday lives, which we don't gather right now, and I think that's a big problem. Okay, so moving on to the question of participation, which I will break out as discussing who joins various online communities, and then also who's contributing content online and sharing content, and basically making their voices available publicly or privately. So here I draw on, in addition to my own data that I've been discussing on young adults, I also draw on nationally representative data from the Pew Internet Project, which is a really wonderful source of internet use data, but it has its limits, of course. So in this case, what I did was I looked at how socioeconomic status, in this case measured as education level, so how education relates to being on different social network sites. In this case, looking at Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, because those are the ones that the data set included. And what you can see is that people from lower educational levels are less likely to be joining these sites. Why should you care? Well, you should care because increasingly a lot of programs are very much targeting users of specific platforms, specific sites, specific services. And if that's where you're going after your constituents, these data suggest that you're leaving out those who are from the least privileged background. You're at least more likely to be leaving out those people than those who are more privileged. So this is my little big data link, right? So a lot of data that we hear about that are based on big data analyses are derived from social network sites, right? You hear about Twitter data being analyzed, Facebook data being analyzed. People who are not on those sites are by default not in those data sets. And so it's important to recognize that the people who are on those sites are not a random sample of the population. Not just the population at large, but not the internet user population either. And so that's very important to remember because, again, those are people whose voices you're not hearing. So when you have an article talk about political opinions expressed on Twitter, automatically, those who are not on Twitter, they're not going to have their political opinions in that data set. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of the young adult sample, I had more sites that I asked about specifically, and very consistent that socioeconomic status, again, relates to who's joining these sites, and that those from less privileged backgrounds are less likely to be on them. And how does this link to skill? So again, the problems I mentioned. And then how does this relate to skill? Well, I also show that those who have lower level skills from 3 years prior, right, which is important because you could say, well, you're using these sites, your skill gets better. So, you know, which comes first? But because I have data over time about the same people here, I can actually look at the data, your skill data from 3 years ago, and see which sites you use today, and show that your skill from 3 years ago is a statistically significant correlate of what sites you're joining or whether you're joining sites. And again, we can see other than Facebook, the other sites, skill very much matters. And Facebook, there's just no statistically significant difference by skill level. And this is the young adult sample. And now moving on to who contributes content. So first, why is that important? Again, lots of enthusiasm about the web, offering a voice to different, you know, to people, and that ranges from sharing your perspectives on a social network site to editing Wikipedia. Okay, so I asked a very, very basic level question, which is, are people engaging in various types of activities? And I report here whether they did these activities ever, because even though I collected data by frequency, it was so rare that many people even did it ever that there's like no point really in breaking it down at that level here. And so again, this is the young adult sample, so the digital natives who are supposedly doing everything online. And what we have is 15% of them aren't doing any of these activities online, and only 7% of them have done all of these activities just even once, like ever. So I think it's a helpful reality check as to who's participating. Now, I want to clarify, because I'm sure this seems like it's very, it is, I want to recognize this is very broad brush. Like, what does it mean, voting on content, uploading videos? Like, that could be so many different things. And so in the interest of time, I didn't include videos on the slides on this, but I can see that I still have a few minutes, so I'm going to sort of interject this here, and happy to talk about it more in detail in Q&A, but I'm working with an education scholar from Australia, Jen Kerwood, on coming up with or discussing dimensions of participation that we think are important to consider in work moving forward. So I think looking at these kinds of general contributory activities was fine several years ago when this literature was just developing. But it's going to be increasingly important to be more specific about what exactly we're studying about participation. To get a better sense of what's really going on in this realm, but also to be able to compare studies. So if you look at the literature on participation, a lot of the findings are not consistent. And I realized after reviewing them carefully, it's probably because they're comparing apples and oranges, basically. So when you do study participation, it's important to keep in mind the following dimensions of participation. One is platform. So asking about, well, where, either decide not to care where people are doing the activity, or ask consciously about it, right? Like, is this something you're doing on Facebook? Is it on a wiki? Is it in some private channel? So platform is one. The other is accessibility in terms of the content's publicness, right? It makes a difference if you're sharing a video publicly versus just to your 3 best friends. It makes a difference partly in the way that you're potentially influencing public conversations. If you ever only share with your closest friends, that's much less likely to have an influence on the world at large. And in a paper that I wrote with Eden Lit, we found that, for example, there's a gender difference in level of privacy of sharing photos, right? So women certainly share photos as much as men, but they're much more likely to do it privately. So again, whom you're reaching with your voice is going to differ. Another factor to consider in these studies is the community to which you're speaking, right? Are you just speaking to your family, or are you speaking to a whole hobby community? Are you speaking to a work community? So that's relevant to keep in mind. An obvious one is content, right? So what does it mean that you uploaded a video? Like, presumably there's some substantive difference between you uploaded a video of a sunrise versus you uploaded a video of your friend making a political speech, right? So content presumably matters as well, and we should keep that in mind. as do forms of expression. So did you create and upload a video, or did you just click like, which could still be relevant, but you could easily make an argument that those are two pretty different levels of contributions. So again, worth pointing out which one we mean. And then finally, purpose. Why are you sharing? Are you sharing because you have questions to ask of a community? Are you sharing because you're trying to inculcate people into some particular perspective? So those are dimensions we encourage that people consider. But for this study, when I hadn't yet had these thoughts about how we should be careful about thinking about through these dimensions, I just had these questions. So we're going to go with that right now. And sad to say, there's not a ton of work out there that really is much more nuanced. So this is what we've got. And what we find is socioeconomic status is, again, related to the types of activities in which people are engaging. So the people from the young adults from more privileged backgrounds are more likely to have experience with more of these types of activities. And then with respect to gender, we have men reporting having done these activities more than women. And unlike with self-assessed skill, it's not clear to me why there would be a gender bias in people reporting what activities they engage, but I'm open to feedback on that. And then again, your prior skill very much relates to what you're doing today. So if you were skilled 3 years ago, you're much more likely to have engaged in these participatory activities. Just one more specific example, and then I'm going to wrap up. So my colleague Erin Shaw and I have looked at gender differences in Wikipedia contributions. So you may have heard popular coverage of this, which it has been covered in popular media, that the vast majority of edits on Wikipedia, which is by far one of the most accessed websites out there, is done by men. So really, like, we're talking about 85%. So huge gender differences. Why does it matter? Studies have shown that topics you would expect to be more male-oriented are, in fact, covered in more detail on Wikipedia. So it actually does matter who's doing this editing. And so there's a literature on, well, what explains this. And there's still, this is one of those areas that's ripe for plenty more research. But one thing that we found, so we kind of infused the skill angle onto this question. And basically what we found was that at lower level skills, there's actually no gender difference. So among young men and young women who have the same level of skill, as in low skill, they're just not editing. That's about the same level. So that's why these two lines pretty much converge here. What's the big puzzle, and I can't explain it right now, but we're doing more research on this. The big puzzle is, why is it that women who are really skilled are so much less likely to edit Wikipedia than men who are really skilled? So that's the puzzle. It's not just about gender, it's about gender and skill. Okay, so summarizing work that I've done in other areas, basically, it's a pretty consistent finding that skills are related to what people are doing online. So whether that's editing Wikipedia or online political participation or whatnot. Why is it helpful to focus on skill? Well, it's helpful because of educators, for example, because that's a variable, that's a factor that we can actually influence, right? That's something we can intervene on. If we know that skills are or lack of skills is what's holding people back from participation, then let's teach them skills, right? Other factors that we know matter, like gender and socioeconomic status, are either things we don't want to change, because we don't want to run around changing people's gender, and socioeconomic status, while I'm sure many of us would love to change lots of people's socioeconomic status, that's a much more complex issue. So skill, of all the variables that we look at, skill is one of those factors that is ripe for intervention. So that's why I think it is very helpful to take a look at it. So just to sum up, takeaways from today, web use skills very much differ when it comes to people's backgrounds, so both gender and socioeconomic status are what I explored today. Young adults are not universally savvy. Some of them are, to be fair, but many are not. So let's not treat them as one homogeneous group of universally savvy generation. And generally speaking, the more privileged tend to have higher skills, which also then translates into more active online engagement, which then suggests to the questions of social inequality that I raised in the beginning that it's the more privileged who are best positioned to benefit from their internet uses, and which then has the potential of increasing rather than decreasing inequality. So it's a potential concern. So who was the person of the year in 2006? I see you. Yeah, so it was you. You were the person of the year, but the takeaway from today is that it's really some of you are most specifically the skilled among you. So on that note, I just want to thank my funders and my students who worked with me on this, and I'm going to pass it on to Amin for the next version. Let's see if I can find. There we go. Let's enlarge this. And we'll do a presentation mode. Oops, that didn't work. That didn't work either. All right. Thank you. That was wonderful. I learned a lot about what I didn't know, which was wonderful. How many of you all know that Mozilla is a nonprofit? Oh, good. Usually half the room doesn't know, so that's great. Great to hear this. Mozilla started out in, wasn't Mozilla, it was Netscape. 8 people got together, decided they were going to slay the dragon at that point. And Firefox is what we're known best for. The Mozilla is actually a fairly large organization. We are about 1,000 people, and we have offices all over the world. And most of us work virtually, which is wonderful. And the foundation and the corporation actually work together. So I actually work on the foundation side. The corporation side are the ones who have really been focusing on the tools like Firefox. They're probably 80 to 85% of them are men who work on the corporation side, no surprise, and on the foundation and our developers, quite frankly. On the foundation side, it's probably maybe a quarter of the folks are developers, and we have focused mostly on learning. And in the past 5 years, the foundation has actually grown from like 3 people to 90 people in a matter of time. And I think part of the reason for that is because there's a recognition that the web is just more than a browser at Mozilla, and that we have the ability to impact learning in a big way. We are a global community. We work with volunteers, which started, that's how they built actually Netscape, with volunteers. And so we've continued to adhere to this philosophy of working with volunteers all over the world to help build and create the web. And much of this is built on being able to make and do and not just consume. Network of global leaders are formal and informal educators. We're advocates for leaders in all ages, shapes, and sizes. People all over the world. We're actually able to translate a lot of our products into 22 different languages. Although I have to say it's not easy to do, as you might imagine. I think it's easier with the browsers, but as we're finding with some of the educational tools that we're developing, it's a lot harder to do. And so we're learning how to do that. We have 2 strands in the Mozilla Foundation. One is on advocacy, and the other is on learning, and I'm going to focus on the learning piece today. And our goal on the learning side is to really focus on empowering individuals and organizations by creating the kinds of tools and credentials and training, et cetera, that are remixable and free. And one of the things that I find in building partnerships with organizations that they actually have a hard time with that free part, because they think there's some catch to it.
and having to, we actually have to do it with them before they realize that really there is no catch. It is okay to remix our stuff and build on it and volunteer with us. One of the things that we're focusing on now more specifically is actually building leaders. And by building leaders, we mean both young people, older people, but our goal is to actually create more people who can teach others how to learn and teach on the web. We also have communities that we work in. We call those really our communities of practices. So we have what we call hive communities, and they started because MacArthur actually helped get these started in Chicago and New York, and we have now been working with NSF and created these hive cities in Chattanooga, Kansas City, and soon to be announced another 3 cities too as well. And those really are where we reach folks at the local level, better understand how our tools work, and continue to figure out how do we spread the kinds of things that we're building. Today, I'm going to actually focus on the web literacy part of our conversation. What the foundation has decided to actually focus on is basically three, I would say, we're calling them hills. We have a tendency at Mozilla to change the name of what we do, but really we're doing the same thing. So we're calling them hills in terms of, like, we're going to focus on privacy, inclusion, and web literacy with the idea of trying to teach as many people as possible and be more diverse about it. So why does web literacy matter? And I think Eszter spoke to why this is important. It's like in 5 years, 5 billion people are going to be on the internet in some way, shape, or form, and every job is going to be a digital job very, very shortly. And so it matters for all the things that you see that are important to us. One of the things that we have done is, in our early days of the foundation, which was not that long ago, we decided to figure out what were the core web literacy skills that people needed. And because of that, we really thought about, like, what is the definition of web literacy, and what does that mean, and what does literate mean? And as you can see, these are some of the definitions that came out of the National Council of Teachers of English, and it is it's based on web literacy. A lot of it is. And so we built our first version of the web literacy map, and I would say that was more focused on developers, quite frankly, because I think those are the folks who were building it. And over the course of this past year, we've come up with version 2.0. Which is a web literacy map that is meant to be more accessible, more practical, and focus less on the fact that being web literate doesn't necessarily mean you need to code. It means you need to understand, basically, how to read, write, and participate. And that was a huge shift for Mozilla, quite frankly, to get them to that point, to understand that that's what being web literacy means. So core to this new map is how to read, write, and participate on the web, and also the inclusion of 21st century skills. And our curriculum tools align with that. And one of the first things that we did when we said, let's take a look at what our web literacy skills are, is we thought about, like, what does it mean to read, write, and participate? And that these skills that everyone needs to succeed in the world, like the 21st century skills, are actually embedded if you'd learn how to read, write, and participate. So we did a bunch of research, probably not in the same way that Eszter did it, but we did a meta-analysis of much of the work that's been done on the 21st century skill, and here's just an example of some of the work we pulled from. And one of the things that we noticed pretty quickly, that there were a lot of people defining what they were, but there was not a lot of thinking about, like, how do you actually measure these? And I think that's been one of the hardest things to do. And so at Mozilla, we're like, well, let's just try it. Let's just figure out how to measure this. And so we decided that that one way of doing this was to actually use credentials and micro badges. And I don't know, Karen may have talked about this a little bit last week, and she was Karen Cater about micro credentials. But badges actually was one of these initial projects that began at Mozilla about 3 years ago. And badges are this opportunity to capture the skills and the characteristics that aren't typically captured by assessments or by traditional assessments. It's meant to capture those, what one of our folks, those weird things that you can't necessarily capture. So it's been an interesting journey, but that's a whole other story about the badges piece of it. This is actually our new web literacy map. So what we did was we took the 21st century skills and we integrated them with our new web literacy. And we went through and we designed the web literacy skills and worked with researchers to do this so that even the verbiage is hopefully a little bit more applicable and understandable. And I think that was folks' biggest complaint about what we did was like it was too it was not accessible by the normal lay person. And I should say that I'm not a technology person. I'm in that, like, I really don't know a whole lot about technology. So, and I didn't come into working at Mozilla having, quite frankly, much experience with it at all. I'm actually a sociologist by training, ironically. But I do know what it takes to help people get these skills and understand what hard-to-need populations need to do. And one of the things that I've really pushed at Mozilla is meeting people where they are, rather than taking this to them and saying, you need to do this, but let's figure out how this meets your needs. So this is one result of that. So I'm going to see if we can, I'm going to show, let's see, can I get to that? Oops. Nope, didn't mean to do that. I'm actually just trying to get to that website. Oh, gosh, where is that mouse? Oh, here we go. It's easier to do it this way. All right. So hopefully this works. So this, if you get onto our website, this is the web literacy map, and we made it interactive, which is ironically something we haven't done before at Mozilla. You'd think it'd be easier. And so if you, click on Connect, you'll see that Connect is part of the Participate. And if you scroll down, you will see what the competencies are, and then you will see individual activities that are connected to that. And if you click on Hack the News, it will actually take you to a lesson plan, right? And it will tell you like how to prepare for it, what the web literacy and 21st century skills are, the kind of materials you need, and it really is a step-by-step, this is how you can learn and you can teach it type of thing. And so anybody can get on here, use this now. You are welcome to remix it in any way that you like and use it. We've, tested this in many different ways too as well. Let's see if I can get back now to, of course, now that I'm in there. Whoops. So this is also, so if you go through all the web literacy skills, you'll be able to see that. The other part of it is that we actually did write a paper about this based on, and you can find that this is our rationale behind like the web literacy skills and why we chose what we did and our research findings. So that paper is there if people are interested in seeing that. So let me go back to this. So feel free to browse, go through it. This is the website. I mean, even if you just type in Mozilla web literacy skill, it'll pop up without a doubt. This is actually just I didn't know if the website would work. So, but here's a screenshot. Here's also teaching activities galore. All right. So there are a whole list of different types of teaching activities that are on there that look like what I showed you before. These are the tools that we actually use to learn and teach on the web. X-ray goggles, Thimble, and WebMaker are some of the tools that we use. We also, in figuring out like how do we teach more people to do it, we've started what we call Mozilla clubs. And they're essentially opportunities to take this, this curriculum and these resources and tools and figure out at the local level how best to teach them. And the Mozilla clubs, if you go to our online resource, actually has some how-tos, like things you need to think about, how do you start one. And it could start in your kitchen, right? This is not like an official after-school program. It could be integrated into existing programs. You can integrate it into what's happening at school as well. But the idea, and some of these actually resources have started to get translated to other languages too as well. This is an example of a one-day training module that we've just been testing, and we've done this with teachers and after-school providers as well, and we're actually working with the Institute of Museum Library and Services, and they're very interested in having public librarians across the country get these core web literacy skills, of which they're 14. And so I think part of that, so we are actually moving into a pilot stage with them as well, and we're going to work with them to figure out, what are the best ways to help them learn and teach skills to their patrons, and that's a big aspect of it. So if you go onto this website, which again you can see that in the activities page, you'll literally be able to link to a welcome, the individual activities, etc., and the resources are there. So. I encourage you to take a look at this when you get a chance. And we're going to create a 2-day one, too, and figure out what, when you want to go a little bit more in depth, what that might look like. And again, it's on here. You can take this, remix it, use it however you like. And we're very focused on roles of both in-school educators and out-of-school educators, because one of the reasons is because in-school educators and teachers have this ability to reach all kids, and that expands the access and equity issues. And you've got the resources and support for that. The role of after-school educators is just equally as important. In some ways, after-school educators have the flexibility to be able to do things and that are more project-based, and also, if it's good, kids vote with their feet. They're either going to come or they're not going to come at all. And so great opportunities here for, I think, in and out-of-school educators to actually partner with each other. I did a lot of building of the after-school field, and a lot of what we did was try to get more participation and engagement and crossover between school and out-of-school. Here is a list of some of the work that we're doing right now, and just a few places we're piloting these different efforts. We have pilots going on right now in the state of Maryland, Michigan, and Oregon on actually piloting the 21st Century Skills badges along with content badges too as well. And you can see in Maryland they're focused on workforce development programs. In Michigan, the partnership is actually with the State Department of Education. So it's almost where you want to be in terms of taking it to scale, but they actually started there because the Michigan Department of Education has already been working with the after-school providers there and are pilot testing this in various school districts right now. In Oregon, they're working specifically in a rural community there and working with business partners to make learning count both in and out of school towards college and career readiness. In California, the Foundations for California Community Colleges, actually when we started to working with them initially, they just didn't think it was possible that community colleges would be interested in badges at all. And one of the reasons that I was told was because it's tied to funding, money. So because people in community colleges, the funding for that depends on how many students they actually apply to get into community colleges. So they actually decided to take the 21st Century Skills and apply it to their curriculum, and right now they're pilot testing these two as well. So we were actually really thrilled that they took the rubrics that we put together, and they've been working with someone to build the assessments, and will be interesting to see how all this happens, rolls out. So that is an example of some of the things that we're doing. It is I would say that as an organization in terms of the learning piece, Mozilla still has a lot to learn. The issues of access and equity are things we talk about a lot. I think there's a lot of work we need to do to see actually how it plays out, both in local communities. But the great news about it is that there's definitely the interest, and we have the tools and the resources to do it, and the staff to be able to do it from all over the world. So look for more to come from us.
So quick question about students and their skill level in relationship to the socioeconomic status. I mean, it sounds like you're saying basically socioeconomic status is still a determining factor of their skills. I was wondering about in schools that have gone like one-to-one, or have a significant investment in technology where students are using that technology every day. Does that? I would think that would affect it. I wonder if that would bear out in any research, or if you have any anecdotal information along those lines.
Yeah. So the data that I gather is from young adults, and so that would be at a previous point in their lives. I think what's important to remember is that it isn't just about the technology. So I think we have this finding of socioeconomic status mattering because children are still getting informal education from their parents as well, right? So if you come from a background where your parents are more likely to be quite informed about technologies, then you're getting a different information at home with the technology, that you have someone to turn to readily to help you out. So while an initiative like that can help, it's not going to substitute. I don't think it would substitute for the knowledge that you're picking up from your parents. And again, it goes against the assumption that it's the kids teaching the parents, which might happen in some cases, but we also have qualitative evidence to show that children very much still turn to their parents to get information about how to use technologies.
Can I just jump in here?
Please.
So when Nicole Pinkard comes, we have a week coming up where we're focusing on the future of creative production. And so Nicole has actually created some things in Chicago, but for middle school students. And we actually do have data that show that the depth of engagement in production activities relates to some of Eszter's measures. So there's definitely things that we can do. We don't have enough of this kind of data, but it'd be exciting to see actually the Mozilla Foundation be able to test out some of the effects of your curriculum on some of the measures that we heard about today.
Yeah, we're planning on that as part of it. So I think the other, I think, so interestingly enough, I mean, that's one of the things we're actually spending more time and energy on is evaluation and research in a way, because the idea of, like I said, it's moving from the developer phase to really thinking about learning. And the good news is that we actually have a huge research component embedded into our IMLS project already, and we have a whole division of like metrics and KPIs and evaluation, and we're actually going to start looking at network effects, which is not easy to do, as we all know, but that's actually a big part of what will be coming out in the next year or so.
Hi, thank you so much. This is for Mozilla. Two questions. One, I wonder, what is the reading level that your online materials are geared for? And two, do your badges link at all with any of the Common Core Smarter Balanced testing? So any evidence that kids doing that will benefit in the ways that California schools are being evaluated?
So we say our materials are for 13 plus because COPPA basically requires us to do that. So when you see that on there, it is designed for 13 plus, but a lot of the materials are being used by elementary school teachers, both in school and after school providers. So it is geared toward that. The activities, if you get on there, are really age appropriate for many different levels. It's the kind of content you decide to do. So like hack the news. Literally, you can go in and hack the New York Times, or you can go in and hack a comic book. It just really depends on what content you add to it. In terms of the badging efforts, that one of the things that we based our 21st century skills on, we actually aligned them with the Common Core standards already, and so they're being tested in Michigan and Oregon, and the sites that I showed you, they have aligned them to the Common Core skills. it'll be interesting to see what happens now with ESSA and how that changes too as well in terms of how they adapt those.
Hi, this has to do with Mozilla and the Netscape history. The web came along 20 years ago, basically at the time of the Netscape IPO, and it represented a new social entity or new cultural phenomenon. We're 20 years out now, and it seems to me we get one of these new cultural emergences from technology about every 20 years. The previous one, about 1975, was the personal computer. And then if you go back 20 years before that, it was, the original batch computers in the mid-50s. Do you have any sense of what we should expect about now? I mean, it's 2016. We should be expecting another emergence of some sort of major technological advent that changes everything in the sense that the web did and the personal computer did. But looking around, it's not immediately obvious to me what it is or where it would come from. But I wonder in particular for people who've been working at Mozilla on the previous generation of the previous thing that changed everything, where they think it's going now.
It's now you can hear me, right? Okay, I just had to have it closer to me. That's a really good question because I, have found that Mozilla has really struggled with that, quite frankly, and trying to think about what is the next thing after Firefox. And, I've seen in the 3 years that I've been there, they've gone from even thinking about building, televisions and things. And so it's interesting. I think they're moving away from that. I do think that one of the things that they have really are focusing in on is the internet itself. Like, how do we just create better usage and increase the access to it in a way? We've done some studies in this year in Kenya, Bangladesh, and India. And one of the really interesting things and Chicago, actually, we did the same series of studies. And what was interesting was that if you ask folks who live in those countries outside of Chicago, they think that Facebook is the internet. They actually don't know what the internet is. And so I think Mozilla's, focus is going to really be to create a web that is this superhighway, this global superhighway that is going to be a relevant tool for everyone that's accessible. And I think that is Mozilla's biggest challenge in terms of how to figure out, because it's not going to be easy given that we claim that we're going to educate all 5 billion people. And so I think in terms of, it maybe not be a hardware product, I think, in the way that people thought about, but it's an accessibility issue that's much larger than anything. And the World Bank is completely focused on this because their solution to solving poverty over the next 10 to 15 years is creating more jobs. For young people, because even with the jobs that exist, it will never, fulfill the number of young people that are coming up. And so they're quite concerned about this. And so they've engaged Mozilla in really thinking about we need to get these basic skills. How do we teach them? How do we get them to the young people? But also, what are the jobs that need to be created?
So I'd like to address this too.
Please do.
Just following up on the comment about Facebook as the internet, it's actually very reminiscent of the mid-late 90s of AOL as the internet, right? So for those of you who were around, or for those of us, I was around, but I actually studied it. I mean, part of my study in 2001 was bringing in people who were in fact AOL users and looking at how they looked for content online, and it really was that was their internet world. And so it's very interesting to see us return to that. And to me, it is very much a skill question. And actually, back then, that's how I was inspired to study skill in the first place, was this idea of, well, how much do these platforms influence what you actually get to see and do online? And then I thought, okay, well, if you're skilled, presumably you can kind of get around them. But if you're not skilled, you're probably going to be much more influenced by them, right? And so presumably we don't want individual corporations to influence users too much in terms of like that being the only world they know online. But again, my argument is, and I think this has come through all the data I've collected since, that skill does matter, that the people who get it are the ones who can kind of sidestep that control of those walled gardens, would be one of the terms. In terms of the question, I mean, I would say maybe this isn't quite the right unit, but I mean, I think mobile is what's, it's very, that's very different from, I mean, 20 years ago, that wasn't really on the scene at all. And then maybe it wasn't, it's been around for a while, but that's really a way that's changing how people access a lot of digital content. But again, in potentially limiting ways from the perspective of people saying, oh, but mobile, you can get everyone, it's cheaper, it's easier. But the reality is you can't do the same things on mobile that you can do when you have a computer in front of you. So we don't want to have this shortcut where we think, oh, well, now everyone's online, they have mobile, great. Because we know that people can't do the same things. I mean, and there've started to be studies on this as well, that even a digital native who is very good with mobile still actually prefers the computer when it's available, because it's more dependent, it's easier to deal with. So it's something that I think has definitely helped get digital media access out there to more people, but we want to be careful in how much we equate that with completely equitable access.
So Mozilla decided that their next big thing, a year in the life of Mozilla is like 10 years sometimes. So we actually decided a year ago mobile was going to be our next big thing. And very quickly realized after 3 or 4 months that it wasn't the device. And we were building phones that were $40. And that was the idea, is to make them inexpensive so that, so anyone could have access to it. And we quickly found out that wasn't the issue. It was how do you become web literate? And so that's where we refocused on that piece of just figuring out how to educate folks. The other thing interesting about the studies that we're doing, and I mentioned we had done Chicago, the same data came out of Chicago in terms of access, in terms of, getting the skills that they need. It was the same, it was people in Chicago. Chicago's a very well-resourced city. It's got like 112, tech centers. It's got so many ways of getting wired up, but still those people who needed the most weren't getting access to it. It was no different than being in a village in India. They were just not getting access to the broadband, to the skills that they needed to be able to read, write, and participate on the web. So I think that actually surprised a lot of folks at Mozilla, realizing that it was the exact same thing that came out of the data.
Hello. So maybe as a follow-up to that, to your comment, I wonder how much the web literacy or literacy in general has to do with the fact that I see my students, I'm a high school teacher, and I see my students struggle with actually navigating the keyboard. And so even when you talk about the mobile, they're cool if it's just about searching, but then it's like, oh, paper, because they are so slow because we've taken out education has taken out those literacy classes that used to be there for graduation, and then somebody said, oh, but there's computers at home. They must know how to use them. So have you done any research on that you can share with us?
So I haven't done research on that. I actually don't know about research on that, but I think it very much goes along with that whole assumption of, oh, they've grown up with it, they must know how to do it, which is, I mean, we all had to sit down and actually learn the whatever method it's, whatever it's called, when you're, where you like,
QWERTY board.
Yeah, the QWERTY keyboard. So it's part of that. Just this like myth of that they know how to do it, and there's no reason they would. Or again, it might explain part of that socioeconomic status difference, that if your parents are in professional roles where they themselves use computers all the time, then they're more likely maybe to encourage you to sit down and learn it, versus if you're if your parents are in the service industry where they're not really using computers, then maybe it doesn't come around to teaching their children to use it. So I think that may actually be one of the ways in which the socioeconomic status difference gets perpetuated. But yeah, I mean, I would just encourage generally not making assumptions about what the kids come in knowing, because we're doing everybody a disservice assuming that they already know it.
Just on that, one of my concerns when you look at skill level as it relates to computer use is with the testing becoming computer-based. Mm-hmm. What you have now is the kids who come from the families where they've grown up with the keyboards and they know how to do it. They're not having that obstacle. And there's a study out recently, I can't remember exactly by whom, that is showing that actually testing paper-based and computer-based, that the kids who have less experience and from lower socioeconomic backgrounds tend to perform more poorly. So in some ways, our moving to digital is exacerbating the achievement gap, which will then turn around and exacerbate, it's just this vicious cycle. And unless there's an intervention, unless they teach how to use these computers from early on so that they're not, and even then, I can't believe that what you do in school is anywhere similar to the depth that you can get when you have that whole home environment and all the other kind of supports and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote an article about that about a year ago, because Illinois was doing the PARCC test on computers, and I myself try to go through the fourth grade level math test, which, I mean, the math I know, but some of the way they were dealing with some of the fractions, and I'm really skilled at this stuff, I found it pretty confusing. And to then think of a fourth grader who might not know the math as well as I do, and then they get hung up on the technology, it's very problematic. I completely agree. There were a bunch of people who had their hands up here. They're not raising their hands anymore, but.
Okay. Hi. I just have a curious question here. Have you done much research about how girls access gaming websites, and how does that influence in their participation and things like that? Because I, as a teacher, when I see my kids, I see a lot of the engagement level go up when I say, okay, let's go into Scratch or a computer game and things like that. What percentage of the girls are actually also participating is another story. So I wondered if you have any research on that gender bias.
Yeah, so I haven't, but I agree with you that I think it's a very important area. I don't really know that area, but I've seen at least kind of more popular writing about this idea that even the popular gendered nature of how we think about these games isn't helping girls, because first of all, it's not traditionally, it's not cool as a girl to be geeky, right? It goes all the way back to that idea, right? And then depending on the games you're playing, is it going to be cool? What does it mean to be cool? And so this is completely anecdotal. I haven't done research on this, but I agree with you that it could be a really important area for knowing why already early on girls are kind of selecting themselves into different levels of engagement with technology, for sure.
Hi, this is a question for both of you. Really appreciated each of your talks. When technology comes to be invisible in various ways, there is a danger to that. And this is a question about whether it's Apple, Facebook, Amazon, all of them have different varieties of it, but recommendation engines, Genius, essentially being handed next things to look at, listen to, read, and the non-transparency for the learner of where that actually derives from. And I'm thinking in particular about Jaron Lanier's quite fantastic arguments in his book, You Are Not a Gadget. Faulting the collective mind of server farms that comes from looking at you in relation to hundreds of thousands, millions of others and making recommendations to you, but they are not curated by humans that you know and might have reason to believe or to doubt. Do you consider reflecting on this recommendation engine phenomena an aspect of web literacies in your work or not?
Yes, so I very much do. It's a great question. There are a few people who've done some work on this, like Ted Strifas at Colorado. But yeah, so the idea of algorithmic literacy or skill is something that I definitely want to include more and more in my work. And just to show how much I am interested in this, I'm actually now, so I just developed an undergraduate seminar, the title of which is 7 Ways Algorithms Control Your Life. But so it's basically about the social implications of algorithms because I believe that they matter very much. And it was interesting developing the course, by the way, because I only found 2 graduate seminars so far that have really focused on this as such. So it seems to be a new area, but I hope more and more colleges take it up. And then, of course, we'd want it to percolate down and talk about these issues at earlier stages. There it's tricky because I'm not sure how much the teachers themselves have that algorithmic literacy. So it's very widespread that, algorithms are objective and they're, they're not manipulated. And we've been having absolutely fascinating conversations in the seminar on this, but I completely agree with you that it has to be part of the skill set now.
And it's very much a part of the work of the web literacy map, because one of the things that we've uncovered, which is not going to be a surprise to any of the educators in this room, is that you just can't throw the curriculum up there without actually doing professional development. Like it only works if you do professional development. So much of what we've been doing is we literally go through like, what's the difference between the web and the internet? What does it mean to search and how to search it? We do hands-on activities with people, and there's usually, when we piloted this, there's usually 4 or 5 of us in the room who are helping people with this. It's a very, very big part of what we do in the engagement part of the professional development of the curriculum. I mean, it's huge. That's probably, hopefully one of the things that we can help people with more than anything.
And that's going to be time. Can we give our speakers a round of applause? Thank you. Is definitely timely, just as I know many of the educators in the room at your schools, you're in the middle of SBAC testing, right? And see the head nods and just also the really emphasis on professional learning. So before you, we're going to continue the conversation with our campfire chats. So we encourage you, please, to complete our exit ticket at bit.ly/EDF equity. That's a short URL. Another web literacy. And your comments are really important. We've shared these questions with our speakers. It was really great last week for Karen and Richard to field so many of the questions that came from you completing this exit ticket. So please take a few moments to go ahead and complete that. A reminder, next week we have a really exciting talk where we're looking at technology in schools. Now what? So it's a question that we have. If you have not already registered, you can do so at our website. We have an outstanding community here of educators who are taking this seminar series for credit and such rich expertise as well. And so we have 2 people who are taking the course for credit who are leaders in their district who will help facilitate our campfire chats. I will be doing one as well, and as well as a student at Stanford student who's taking this course as well. So I'm really excited. Our campfire chats. How many of you participated in a campfire chat so far? All right. So most of you have been looking forward for you to participating in that. Take a seat at the table after taking a break. And again, if we can give a round of applause to our speakers. Here's a link one more time, and I look forward to seeing all of you again at Education's Digital Future, Equity by Design.